Hello there everybody, welcome back to Good Game Have Fun. I'm the Hat Person and here's my review of The Legend of Heroes Trials of Cold Steel. So I do want to make a few things clear, just a small little note before I begin with the review proper. This review is from the PlayStation 3 version after playing for 42 hours of the game and also watching the recap from the second game. The thing that happened is that a long time ago when Trials of Cold Steel 2 came out, I actually got a review code for free, but because I had no idea what Trials of Cold Steel was, or I hadn't even played any of the games yet, I said, okay, well I want to play the first one first, and then I'll do a review of the second one. So I accidentally ended up spoiling myself when I played the second one for the first time, saw the recap for the first one, and then I played the first game. So yeah, the order is a little bit screwed up on my history with Cold Steel, but that's the amount of time that I played, and now I feel completely comfortable in expressing my thoughts on it. So I do want to address the PC version, which is coming out at the same day that this video review is coming out. So if you want to compare PC with console, they're both pretty much exactly the same game, except that in the PC version there's slightly more content because there's 50% more voice acted lines there than in the console ones. That and there's, the typical PC graphical upgrades that all of these ports tend to get. So if I want to recommend any version, I'd say go for the PC version, but no matter where you play it, Trials of Cold Steel is still an awesome game, so whether it's PS3, PlayStation Vita, PC, wherever, I still recommend that you play it in whatever way that you personally prefer. Alright, now let's begin the review. The short version of the review goes like this. The Legend of Heroes does it again with yet another incredible start to an exciting trilogy. The gameplay is fun as hell, the characters are great, the music is awesome, the story is interesting, and the lore runs so deep that you could almost believe that this game is based on actual real-life locations. Aside from some difficulty spikes and voice acting inconsistencies on the PlayStation versions, PS3 and Vita, there really isn't a bad thing that I have to say about the game. I do highly recommend this to anybody that is a fan of Japanese RPGs or a fan of the Legend of Heroes franchise in general. So there you go, the short version, short and concise. What you want to know, is the game good? Yes, go buy it if that's what you're into. But if you want me to expand, well, the long version of the review goes like this. The Legend of Heroes Trials in the Sky was my first foray into the Legend of Heroes series. I fell in love with it ever since, but had no idea how much it could improve from there. I was so blown away at how well made the Sky games were that I never thought it could get any better than that. That is until I started playing Trials of Cold Steel. This game is a completely different story, cast, location, and graphical style than its predecessors. Even then, it still contains the same charm and heart that got me so attached to the characters of the previous games. And now that it has arrived on PC, there is even more voice acting and graphical upgrades that make the experience so much more enjoyable. So Trials of Cold Steel is an RPG that mostly takes place in Thor's military academy, where our characters study, learn, they get to know each other in a very Persona-ish kind of way, but not quite. The game will soon start sending you out on field studies, in which you explore the world and fulfill requests for people. Eventually you get embroiled into more complicated story arcs consisting of political intrigue and internal struggles within the cast. Of course, you have the typical JRPG stuff, right? Like dungeons, battles, boss fights, leveling up, just like in any other RPG. Cold Steel doesn't necessarily break new ground in those places, but that's not what necessarily makes the game special. The beauty lies in its writing. I remember falling in love with Trials in the Sky because of how entertaining it was to see the characters bounce off of each other with banter and events that allowed them to grow. They all felt very real, distinct, and I felt very much attached to them in the same way that I felt attached to Cease from Persona 3 or even the investigation team in Persona 4. Or hell, now that I'm playing a lot of Persona 5, I would say that I feel attached to the Cold Steel characters in the same way that I feel attached to the Phantom Thieves right now in Persona 5. So yeah, I love the characters in Cold Steel. Shortly after all the main characters in Class 7 come together, you start to see them unfold in very interesting ways. None of them are perfect, they all have flaws, prejudices, and doubts in some places, just as much as how they are experts and intelligent in other places. There's one particular character that is very much against the higher echelon of society. The rich people are like, no, you're rich, so I'm just going to dismiss everything that you say. And it's really interesting how well this character develops because he starts off as being kind of a jerk, but then everybody else kind of, clashes with him and start to teach him, hey, you shouldn't judge people because of this, and that, we gotta coexist and be friends and all that kind of stuff. And you really do see him change and his perspective kind of fluctuates as the game progresses. It's really cool that you don't see characters that are just completely perfect and flawless from the very beginning. It is very much clear that everybody has their own deal going on and they all solve it by setting all their differences aside and trying to get through this together. Seeing all of them bump heads and get to know each other was always interesting and fun to see, which always encouraged me to keep on playing. On top of that, all of the information involving the setting runs incredibly deep. Everything you can think about in this game has its own history and further enriches the story. The most impressive part is that it's all optional. You don't have to read any of it. It's almost like in Skyrim with all those books that you can read. You either can read them or not read them. Nobody's forcing you to do so. You could easily miss all of it if you don't like reading lore, but you do well in visiting the library a couple times. Even if it is just for geeking out at all the references to the previous games. It's like, oh, look, they mentioned Liberal. Oh, they mentioned the Zeiss place where we went in Trials in the Sky before. It's just a lot of references, a lot of memory lane happening there with all those books, and it's always enjoyable to read up on it. Speaking of playing, the combat system is pretty much identical to the previous title, save a few minor differences. The turn-based combat and the orbment system from Trials in the Sky are back in Cold Steel, but slightly different through the addition of the Arcus, so this device allows you to essentially pair up with other party members for special attacks that add more variety to the fights. The same magical elements and orbment customization, turn order, all of that is still there, which allows for a lot of strategy against a wide variety of enemies, whose designs are also very entertaining to see. The developers don't necessarily fix what's not broken, but rather improve it by adding more fun things to it, and seeing it all moving in 3D is awesome, especially when viewing all the characters' ultimate attacks. Speaking of having an enjoyable time, the visual elements are pretty solid. That is, for a PS3/PS Vita game, it looks pretty good. It has a much more modern anime look, which is a bit different from Trials in the Sky, which is more reminiscent of anime from the 90s. It's a bit different, but it looks really good and still feels like a part of Erenbonia, the continent that the game takes place in. Being a massive RPG, there are some inevitable flaws like rough textures in the environment and the typical green plains with nothing on them, but the vast majority of it looks really solid and pretty eye-catching. All of the characters' designs look great and distinctive, with even the NPCs having a lot of memorable looks, especially the female characters. All of this accompanied by a very competent soundtrack filled with many tracks that left me humming to myself afterward. Pretty soon all of these elements come together very well, creating a cohesive experience that features bonding with great characters, then learning more about the world in the same way that the cast does. It's the small things that really make the experience very special for me. Though I had a great time with the game, there were some things that bothered me a little bit. So for starters, the high school field study routine can get pretty predictable very quickly. After you do it once, you pretty much have the entire gameplay loop figured out. You go to school, you hang out with your friends, you get tested on something, and then you leave for your trip. And then when you leave for your trip, you get maybe like 1 or 2 sets of just regular ass quests, and then there's the one that's like, oh, this unexpected/corrupt thing happened, and only we can solve that problem kind of quest. That's the kind of stuff that always happens at the end. Things get serious, the story progresses, and then we come back to school being completely off the hook with what happened before for some reason, and then you just rinse and repeat. Like, that's how it is. School, social stuff, trip, political intrigue, come back, repeat. Now, obviously, all of the dialogue and the characters that are featured within these little story arcs are awesome, but it does reach the point where you can see the story beats happening from a mile away. If there are any other concerns I can point out, it would probably be the combat and its sudden spike in difficulty. I was playing the game on the easiest level, but even then there were moments where impenetrable enemies came out of nowhere. Even if you saw their weaknesses, or sometimes they didn't even have a weakness, they were just bullet sponges where you just had no choice but to keep hitting them and hitting them and hitting them and hitting them and wasting resources until eventually the enemy just fell over and died. Which is very different from all the other enemies that do have some more clear weaknesses. They do encourage more strategy, and the faster you kill an enemy, the more points you get rewarded, right? So having a boss fight or just a regular enemy that takes forever to kill can be pretty frustrating and a waste of time. Oh yeah, and the quests still expire in this game, which is something that really pissed me off from Trials in the Sky back in the day, where you had the bracer notebook and you had your quest, and if you don't finish them after a certain amount of time, or if you didn't finish them before the story progressed in some way, then they would expire and you wouldn't be able to do them, which I thought was complete bullcrap. Well, they're doing the same thing here in Cold Steel, unfortunately. They're a lot more lenient this time. Here they give you pretty much 1 story quest and then 2 or maybe even 3, just kind of side stuff that you can do. and everything is relatively easy. All the quests have never really been like impossible to do, so you'd be doing yourself a disservice by not doing the side quests first and then ending it all on the story quest, to which then time passes and then you don't have to worry about the side stuff anymore. So one final gripe would be the voice acting, and even this gets fixed in the future. So let me talk about this. There's nothing actually wrong with the voice acting itself. As a matter of fact, I love the performances, but rather with the frequency in which we get to hear it. That's the thing that really bothers me in the Vita and the PS3 versions. This is a very common thing with Japanese RPGs, especially when you talk about the kind of budget they end up having, especially as well when you dub them into English or any other language. There are some moments that I would say that they're pretty important moments in the story that aren't voiced. You'd think that they would be voiced, but they're not. Sometimes even within the same cutscene, like even within the same dialogue sequence, there's voices and then suddenly there aren't any anymore. I think maybe there's like 1 or 2 moments where this happens. My memory can be pretty faulty, but I remember like there's some dialogue where there are voices and then just nothing. I'm like, what? Like, I remember like Ni no Kuni 1 doing this before, and like that was really frustrating as well, and it's equally as frustrating here. And again, you know, it's all about the budget, and you know, sometimes you don't have enough money to voice every single line like an Atlas game or something, but it's understandable, but it still kind of bothers me. Now, the reason for why I say that I can forgive this is because of the PC version, where they announced that they have 50% more voice acting in that version than in the console versions. And I've seen a couple videos of that voice acting, and it pretty much voices everything that I wanted to see voiced, which is a very awesome thing. And along with all of the graphical upgrades for that PC version, it makes the experience a lot smoother, a lot more enjoyable, and of course there's more voice acting. This is something that you know, Xseed or, you know, whoever was developing this game, they didn't have to do this. You know, they could have just said, well, just port this game and put it here and there it is on PC, yay. No, like they went out of their way to further make this game better, which, again, they didn't have to do, but they did. So I appreciate that a ton. So in conclusion, despite my tiny gripes, Cold Steel I think is an amazing game. Everything that I do in it is fun as hell, it looks great, sounds great, and is filled with the same enormous amount of heart that made me fall in love with the Legend of Heroes series to begin with. The gameplay format translates beautifully in 3D, and it brings the continent of Erenbonia to life in a different way than before. The way that the game ends left me on a little bit of a bittersweet note, almost in a Empire Strikes Back kind of way. And by that I mean that stuff goes south very quickly at the end. Of course, I'm not gonna spoil you here, but you know, I just wanted to get that out. So Cold Steel is very similar to Trials in the Sky, in that it doesn't really break any new ground, is not being revolutionary with some totally new game mechanic or anything like that. I just think this is an incredibly well-made and solidly written RPG, and I highly recommend that all of you play it. It's easy as that. You know, I just think it's great. It's awesome, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on the second game so that I can play as much of it as possible and then write a review for that as well. There we go, so that's a video. Thank you very much guys for listening or watching or what have you. Be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, give this video a like if you liked it, and of course you can follow me on all my social media and all my stuff. You can go to my website, Good Game Have Fun, for more writing and videos, and all my stuff is out there, so check it out if you're interested. Thanks.